Now then, this was a sort of backwards video, as it were. We've got this Makita, it's a 9609B 9-inch angle grinder, 2000 watts, 6500 revs. Been donated to the cause, as it were. It squeals like a stuck pig, so I'm not going to start it up because it sounds so horrible that I don't want to do any more damage. So I'm going to take it apart, and from the point where we've got it apart we'll do the fixing and then the putting back together. So we'll just see how that sort of format works. What else I've got to tell you? It's quite old, it's quite heavy, it's the old style Makita, you know. It's been used well, but they were made well, weren't they? So let's crack on and see what happens. So we've got the gearbox on, and I've been trying to get this armature out of here. Put that in the vise with some soft jaws and give it a tap and all sorts of things. It's not coming out. There's the bearing housing, and there are no visible screws, so I'm figuring drill a hole in that centre of that plastic there and put a drift in and try and drift the shaft out of the bearing. I don't know whether the shaft has been spinning in the bearing or what, but there's only one way to find out. Interestingly, on this end the bearing's held in on the gearbox end with a plate and 3 screws. So I'm wondering if we look here, there's a little boss there, and all this lot is part of this outside, so we can't really get to anything. But this whole thing screeches like mad, so we've got to do something. So drill a hole there and see if I can drift the armature out. Right, I've got this big Makita angle grinder, and I had merry hell of a job to get this armature out of there. Yeah, and next to impossible. So I ended up drilling a hole in the plastic, and when I did that, all I saw was that where I drilled, and that was the end of the armature. Yeah. Anyway, I put a drift in there and belted that, and nothing happened. Precisely nothing. Yeah. So I thought, okay. And then when I was drilling in there, I noticed the armature spinning inside here. Yeah, you could just see through these windows. So what I did in the end was, that was in there. Let me show you. So what I did was, the shaft was tight in the vise, a pair of cold chisels there, and put some pressure on, and then a punch and belt from the top, and it gradually came apart. So that took quite a lot of aggression, and the bearing here, the bearing race has collapsed and it's absolutely shot, and I suspect we may have trouble getting that bearing off there, which means we'll have to again do a Dremel and get this apart. So I'm just going to get on with that. So as you can see, the bearing's absolutely shot. But it took quite a lot of aggression to get this armature out of that housing, which just means you go, okay, well, we'll either get it apart or we'll break something. And luckily we got it apart. But there's a bit of plastic there. It looks like melted plastic on here. So obviously the bearing got hot and it melted the plastic. That way the bearing wouldn't come out of its housing. I'm going to put this in the vise now and see if I can squash it and break this outer so I can get to the inner. So we just pop that in there. I've got glasses on. Well, I should be able to get that apart now. There we go. That's a bit of plastic. So then we need to get this inner race off, and as we did last time with the D-wall, I'm going to use the Dremel and cut at an angle and try and cut through all that lot. You don't need, well, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but it might be quite difficult to film, but let's give it a go. Aha! It is now moving. I doubt if this will... No. Where did I put that? Where did I put that? Punch. I've gone and put it down somewhere. Here it is. mighty tight on there. Right, it's going. Because that's cut at an angle there, as I'm hitting it, it's going out. Brilliant. There we go. So, where are we? That's not bad. I'll clean that up with a bit of emery paper, and then it's back into the box of miscellaneous assorted bearings to find one of the right size. It's been a fight, but it's worthwhile because it's a big Makita, I think it's 2 kilowatt angle grinder, so real nice. And as you can see, and let's just zoom out a bit, the armature, there's no bluing on the armature or anything like that. So as soon as that started making a real bad noise, somebody stopped using it, which is the sensible thing to do. I'm just noticing here one of these fins is bent on the fan. I'll just have to pay attention to that. Right, let's find the bearing and clean that shaft up, because there's a couple of little grinder slots in it. Would you believe it? Had a good route through the box and I found one. And interestingly, that cold chisel that I used, I don't know whether you'll be able to see, but it's a blacksmith made one. Can't focus. There, can you see those ridges on it? It's made out of an old file. Brilliant, isn't it? I like that sort of thing. There you go. Anyway, so what is this bearing? Says Japan on it. It's a 620. Yeah. And I'm going to just flip the seal out and put some grease on there, and then we'll just need to, it's a bit tight on there, we'll just get some paper again like this and take that shaft down. Just so the bearing fits. Okay, that's getting better. I think that will do actually. There's a bit of a mark there. And then there's some ridges there from the Dremel, but that's alright. Right, let's just put some grease in that bearing. Okay, nice and gentle. There we go. Bit of grease in there. You don't want too much, but want enough. And then put the seal back in. There we go. Okay, so yeah, I'm just going to tap that on. That's pretty good. It's on tight, so it isn't going to spin on the shaft, but it's not too tight. Okay, that's grand. Yeah, and that's level on the end. So, yeah. Then this goes back in there. And I'm hoping it will fit in the right. No, it won't. Ah, there's a bit of bearing. I can see a bit of bearing in there. So I've just got to clean this out. So let's just see if I can. I'm just using a half round file just to clean up inside that plastic housing. Quite tricky. And difficult to get down there. But that looks a bit better. And the other thing that I've forgotten to do whilst we're here, there is a bit of wear on that commutator, so I'm just going to clean that up. That's a bit better. So that goes back in there, and I shall just fit that back in that, get that bearing to fit in properly. And luckily we have drilled a hole in the end so we can see when it's all the way down. I think this needs to get against something solid and then a drift. So I'll just do that off camera. Don't want to be hitting that really. That's bad scene. Okay, that was better. If you can see in there now, you can see the end of the armature. Yeah, so that's a lot better. That against something solid and a block on there, and then a few taps and in it went. So it was a combination of cleaning out the plastic recess and having this against something solid. So that goes like that. Then we had a fan duct that went there, like that. And then we've got this. Now, I suppose we ought to have this apart and put some grease in that bearing as well, if the back bearing's gone, you can guarantee that this is not going to be very good, because on this side, if you look down there, you can see a rubber seal on the bearing right down there. So the grease from the gearbox is not going to get into that bearing very well. So we'll have these screws out and have a look at that bearing. Do you remember this Bosch Impact? It was the one that Steve donated, and I fixed the batteries. So let's just see. Come on. Way! Perfect. That one's not very good. That one's undone. That screw there, somebody else has been at that. So I think I'll have to get the mole grips to it. There we go. That's undone it. I don't think we need to actually drift this bearing out, but we can just hook the seal out. It's not bad in there, but I'll put some more grease in. That'll do. And then put the seal back in. Grand. That's that. And then we put this back. It was worth taking that apart just to know that it's got enough grease in it now. And if you think that's a bit too much, well, we're only putting grease from one side of the bearing, so there's plenty of other room in there. There we go. Okay, so I'm not quite sure which way round this went, but it's always, you can always change it. This fan guard, okay, the screws line up, the holes line up with the screw holes. Yeah. So just put a couple of screws in there to line everything up before we pull it down. Another screw in there and one in there. Brilliant. Now we could pull them down with the impact, but I'm not going to. So we'll just wind that down slowly. So that's those lot tightened up. We've got the gear to go on, and there's a woodruff key. So the woodruff key goes down in that slot. Hopefully you can see it just down there. Where are we? Just there. There's a woodruff key. Yep. And then the gear goes on. And the woodruff key's at the top. There we go. That's a nice fit. Now then, here we go. Then there's a collar. Yeah. And then the circlip goes in place. So we just put the circlip on. Just make sure it goes down in that slot, which it has done. Okay. Before I put any more grease on, I just want to make sure that everything is as it should be. Okay. Yeah, and the armature's spinning all right, so that's good. Okay, well, maybe we don't need any more grease, but we'll put a bit in there. Okay, and that bearing feels fine, and I think that that goes like that. It does. Okay. Yes, I could clean all this lot up and wash it all down, but I'm choosing not to. Now then, these were little bolts. And they're all different, so I suspect somebody else has been in here before. After all, it was a donated item, so they look like 6mm, so I'm going to get some 6mm bolts. Right, got a load of 6mm bolts here. Are they too long? No, there's plenty of room. Except these aren't 6mm. Okay, they're 4mm. Well, there you go. Sometimes you just can't win. So that's those tightened down and made sure that this meshes, and the armature is spinning quite smoothly now, which is great. Now, before we go any further, we've got to put this lot back together. Let's move those unused bolts out of the way. Okay, so it was the bottom one went to the top. Okay. And the top one went to the bottom. So we just lift this out. Isn't that typical? It's stuck on there for all that time. Through the eye, behave. Grant. Okay. And the top one. Okay, now we should have a couple of screws to put this back in place, this little plate. There it is. Put the other screw back in. Okay. And then this goes on there, except this comes round here. That cable is a bit heavy duty. Now, there was only one screw in there, so we'll have to find some more for down there. Okay, and then that goes on there with these huge screws, which is, well, that's how they designed it. I mean, bearing in mind that this angle grinder is probably more than 25 years old. It was built up to a standard rather than down to a price. And we've looked at an angle grinding recently where I suspect the philosophy was the other way round. Right, what we can do now, before we go any further, after having tightened this lot up, is put the brushes in and give it a whirl. One brush goes in there. And the other brush, don't forget to tighten that up, goes in there. Okay, that's that one. Tighten this one up. Let's just put the handle on there. Okay. Switch the mains on. Yeah. Plug it in. What do you reckon? So that was a lot quieter, and you know, for occasional use that'll be perfect, and that's all it gets round here anyway. So you know, it's not as if it's in industry and using it all the time, but I suspect that'll see me out. You know, it'll last a long time. The bearings are good, they're greased up, the brushes are good, the commutator's good, there's no wear perceivably or no damage on the armature. So hopefully you've enjoyed this, and we'll catch up soon, eh? Keep safe. Cheers for now.